Hi, everybody. I'm here once again with Robert Phoenix for our Astro Fix, the winter of 2020. Hard to even believe we're in 2020. Seems like we were just freaking out over 2000 and all the glitches. Anyway, Robert is warning us in advance that this is a tough period of time coming up. So I'm just giving you a heads up right now. We're going to look at the reality of what the stars are laying out for us, and we're also going to look at the opportunity within each of these points, because I think it's really important. We're all here together, we're all here by choice on some level. So let's do this thing. So Robert, welcome.
Hey Regina, it's great to be back, and thank you. And yeah, it just seems like yesterday we're all freaking about Y2K and how big a deal that was going to be, and we barely had enough time to catch our breath from Y2K, and then we were hit smack dab right in the third eye with 9/11, and the world hasn't been the same since. Time hasn't been the same since. And here we are. We're starting off on our almost our second decade now in the 2000s, and we're in the 20s, and things are going to get ramped up real quickly here.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm tempted to be very cliche and say winter is coming, but it actually has some meaning. And you know, there are dark phases humanity passes through. That's just a reality. And then we pass through the light again. And I think to handle the more challenging phases with grace and wisdom and connection to one another is really the key. And so when we're going through and talking about each of these aspects, let's at the end of each major one, let's talk about what the opportunity is for us, by way of learning, by way of awakening and choosing to awaken to hidden truths that we may have hidden from ourselves, and any opportunities we see in that, because I think it's really important for us to see something that can appear one way does not have to be devastating. We need to always remember that we always have power in the situation to use it to the best possible. And I say advantage, not in as to take advantage of, but to take advantage of the learning embedded in it. So with all of that long wind up, first of all, we're going to go to the fact 2020, just the number 2020. Let's go to that first, Robert.
Yeah, 2020 is a really interesting number because you have embedded inside of that essentially two 20s. And 20 is the number of the judgment card in the major arcana. And a number of people who follow this, I'm sure, are very well versed in tarot and esoteric systems. But for those who are not, the judgment card, which is also known as the Aeon, represents the end of one age and the beginning of another age. And what's kind of interesting now is that where we are with 2019, if you add 19 and 2 together, you get 21, which is the world card in the major arcana. So 2019 represents kind of the height or the apotheosis of a cycle of time. So we're completing the run of the major arcana through the Gregorian calendar. And when we hit 2020, when I talked about the 220s, it really breaks down to 22. And 22 takes us into the Fool card, which is the alpha stage, not the omega stage, but something new is coming in 2020. However, that said, we saw this in a lot of ways with Y2K, which is what we were talking about, was the end of kind of one epoch and era and the beginning of something new. We hit the world card in 2001, and then the world came tumbling down with the World Trade Center, right? Okay, so we have precedent, chronological precedent here. So we're coming into something new. The wrinkle here now are these 220s, which the Aeon represents, again, this heralding of the old of the new and the demise of the old. We're having it 2 times. So I could see where we would have at some point 2 major events in the coming year that will really put a capstone on the period between 2010 and 2019. And because we're dealing with that 22 energy, that Uranian energy, it's not going to be business as usual. And look, I want to be clear about this too. The Fool in the major arcana also represents the ability to have quantum leaps. In as much as the Fool can be absolutely foolish, in the tradition of the Heokaya or Hermes or the trickster, there can also be amazing feats of adroit navigation in leaping from one state to the other. So people need to keep this in mind, because there will be times when I think we're all going to be called to make radical pivots in our lives, and fortune favors the bold. So
absolutely.
If you want to hang on to the old paradigm's not going to be there.
Right. And that's important for us all to all get our mind around. We've been ramping up to it for a while. And I also wanted to bring up that in numerology, the number 22 itself is a master number. Yes, it can be reduced to 4 and is reduced to 4, but standalone 22 is a master number. And that has a higher capability within it.
Right. And again, I'm just going to play a little bit of the devil's advocate here, right? And this cuts both ways, right? So for us, it's like, okay, here you go. Here's your test, right? Are you willing to take your master's exam?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we can define it that way.
Right.
And trust me, we've all had plenty of time to prep for this. And if you haven't prepped for this, you better start cracking your internal books, okay? Now, that said, on the other side of the story, the quote-unquote managers of this domain, this planet, also see 22 as being intrinsic to their script as well, right? So if they're the master builders, what are they building? What do they have in mind? And what do they have to tear down? Because one of the things that is very prevalent in that judgment card is Gabriel blowing his horn. And so we see the destruction, right? We see the destruction of the world, or we see the fall of an age, or we see the fall of a temple, however this translates. So we're going to see this year. It is coming, I'm telling you. And there is a plan and a goal in mind for the master builders to move something new into place. And, that's a whole nother discussion.
Now, are you talking master builders as in more master manipulators? The ones
right, who exactly. I mean, I think the people that found, and I use the word in quotes, found our culture and found our civilization and then built upon it.
But the one thing they rely upon is the masses remaining unconscious. This is critical, and we are being herded in that direction en masse. But at the same time, many people are stepping up into this more masterful part of themselves. This is certainly, I mean, if you look back into years, hundreds of years past, even 100 years ago, far more people are aware of the nature of reality and the nature of their own reality than were before. So I think, the silver lining to this is if we've been paying attention, if we've been doing the work, and we've been willing to look at the things that are really difficult within ourselves, our culture, and the human species, I think we're well positioned to take this period on in a masterful way.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think most of the people that I interact with, the people from my world, who, by the way, are very much commingled with your world.
Yes.
It's a very switched on group of people, and not just switched on in a kind of a conventional sense. I mean, these are people that are really willing to look at truths that may make them feel very uncomfortable in some ways.
Right. Absolutely.
And cross lines that will at times alienate them from family and friends. And I'm not even really talking about your typical kind of left and right or blue or red debate. I mean, these are much deeper kinds of questions and issues about the nature of reality, who controls it, why, who's pitted against one another, why is this happening, has it happened before, right? All these things, and then being able to zoom in and look at the groups, the individuals, and the consciousness who seem to be driving these events, while at the same time not falling into a state of victimhood.
Yes.
Because that's the other thing. It's really easy for us to sit back and say, oh, it's the Jews, or it's the Zionists, or it's the Russians, or it's the bankers, or it's the socialists, or, you know, or it's the KKK, or whoever that is, right? And a lot of that might be true. And a lot of the work that I've done seems to say a lot of these groups have blood on their hands, okay? But at the same time, we've got to get to the next level. And the next level is about transcending that so that we can have a different kind of reality that emerges from inside of us and then begins to manifest on the outer.
So then let's launch in. You just a minute ago said, so fortune favors the bold. Let's just say our own internal spiritual wealth favors the bold. How's that? Okay, and we're going to go from that platform today. So let's start with the eclipse, the final eclipse of the year, which is the day after Christmas. So what's happening just immediately before Christmas? People will be seeing this at that time, okay?
Right. So just immediately before Christmas, we have, of course, Jupiter moving into the sign of Capricorn. And that's really the big news of the universe. And it happens kind of right at the start of December. So even though Sagittarius will still have a great deal of energy and output due to the fact that we're in the final days of Jupiter and Sag. I think tomorrow is the last day of Jupiter and Sag. So we're still catching some of that updraft via the sun. And then Mercury will come back around from its retrograde path and move into Sagittarius. And then later, when we get into January, Mars moves into Sagittarius. So we still have a lot of Sagittarian energy with us, which has been a very interesting journey because of the truth factor that's been involved with this. Now, it's been in this kind of turgid conflict with Neptune for most of the year, and trying to get to what truth really is, or what's behind what's happening, can be very, very difficult, and has been difficult. But as Jupiter's begin to separate from Neptune, things are becoming clearer. And I feel like the last 3 to 4 weeks of this past month, I've been incredibly clear, and I think a lot of other people have been, which is why I've been talking about how this period in November, right around from the middle of November to the end of November, has been vitally important, and for people to soak up as much of this time as possible for where we're headed. Now, Jupiter brings expansion and brings more of whatever Jupiter represents, right?
So what happens when it pairs with Capricorn?
Well, so in Capricorn typically represents things like the government, corporations, CEOs, the world, not the creation of laws, but the execution of laws, which is quite interesting because I saw recently where Gavin Newsom had to sign 870 bills into law. Why does a state need 870 bills? I mean, I'm sure there's probably a valid explanation in there somewhere, but as we leave one sign, and I've always talked about this, as we leave one sign and the next sign is coming, those final degrees give us an insight into what's ahead. So by that act alone, by Gavin Newsom signing 870 bills, I can easily foresee that the coming year, Jupiter will bring us huge amounts of government. Big government. We're going to see more of what Gavin Newsom did, probably on a state level, probably on a national level, quite likely on a global level. So, good luck. Good luck in 2020. If you are anti-government or if you want less government, you're going to stare that right in your face. And now what's also interesting about this is that as a result of this, we are actually going to be able to see it, right? We're going to see it. It's not going to be hiding out anymore. It's not going to be like, oh, well, while you guys are arguing about impeachment, oh, we're just going to re-up the Patriot Act while you're not looking, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to see more of this. And all of a sudden, I think even people who have been on the sidelines or they may have been staunchly in this camp, like I could easily see people on the Trump side going, what's going on here? I mean, I thought we signed up for less of this, right? And then I can easily see people on the left saying, well, what's going on here? We don't like this. Even though theoretically it might favor us in some ways, there's still a gross overreach here. So when this excess begins to come up, it's like inescapable. So people can look at it and go, there's something wrong on this, something wrong here. So maybe we need to step in and begin to limit some of, because Saturn's going to be there too, right? I mean, we're going to have Saturn most of this year as well, part of a 20-year cycle, which has this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction taking place. And the last time it happened was 2000, which is what we were talking about, when Jupiter and Saturn were in Taurus. And then prior to that was 20 years before that, so 1980, Jupiter and Saturn in Virgo. And then again, 1960, Jupiter and Saturn, 61, Jupiter and Saturn Capricorn. So when we see these cycles, they generally have to do with levels of production, resources, and distribution. So then we get into stuff around the economy, and that's a whole other discussion as well. But Jupiter's moving into Capricorn, and on a personal level, it's one of those things where, we've gotten into this before, being your own CEO.
Yeah, I was just trying to get a fact check on something. A major corporation talking about essentially withholding pensions coming up in the future as a potential. And with this, since we're dealing with institutions, we're dealing with a redirection in production and flow. Is this something that would be in alignment with the times coming up, is kind of a freezing of pensions and assets and so forth?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, again, one of the things you and I talked about last time is this merging of government and business together, this corporatic kind of institutionalization, which I think is still continuing to happen, is still continuing to roll out. And I think one of the things that people really have to watch out for, and this gets into the nodes, which is always kind of an interesting discussion as we go into that final decan of the North Node in Cancer and the South Node in Capricorn, in this whole kind of idea of Cancer being home and people and nurturing and values and growing, and then Capricorn being all that business stuff and government stuff. Well, with the South Node, really, business and government should be taking a back seat right now to the needs, the real needs of the kind of this Cancerian kind of what's the word I'm looking for, agenda or this opportunity, really, right? But here's what's happening. Because we have Pluto in Capricorn and we have Saturn in Capricorn, and now we have Jupiter in Capricorn, what they're doing is they're almost acting like these massive antibodies that are protecting this South Node, where there's a vulnerability and an opening. And instead of allowing kind of this natural shift and balance to take place, what's being done now is they're propping up this vulnerability in the system, right? And I'll give you a case in point. Again, I'm going to bring it back to the state that you and I are currently in, California. There's now talk that there, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but the dialogue is out there now that because there's such a massive problem with the homeless, that the state of California is beginning to talk about asset seizure and beginning to, guess what, privatize, basically, I would call it nationalization, but taking income out of private accounts, putting it into state seized funds or state funds where privatization or private equity is frozen and seized, so they can theoretically take care of the homeless problem. Okay, this is classic. South Node Capricorn, right? Government coming in and saying, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to fix the problem that we helped create.
Interestingly, because talk about the corporate interface, I believe Apple just stepped in and is going to be pitching in a few $1 billion into the homeless projects here in California.
Well, that's great. I'd love to see, how that manifests. That'd be wonderful. But I can see where this is going, and we just have to be careful with things that on the surface also. I mean, we don't know what kind of strings are attached to that, right? I mean, this is just where I go. It's just how my head is wired.
No, I know that's your bailiwick.
Yeah, I mean, so let's play it out. Let's say Apple says, we got all these resources and we have all this money and funding for the homeless. But guess what? The homeless are going to have to be a part of a program where they're going to be tracked. They're going to be bio-identified. There's no free lunch here, right? I mean, I'm just playing it out.
I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong.
Right. I just think that there's always going to be some benefits. I don't think people are, I think individuals can be really altruistic.
Yeah.
That's just my sense.
Yeah,
when it comes to corporations, the way that they're set up, that's not how they're set up. They're not built on altruism. They're built on always acquiring either more assets or power or control, just like governments.
So we are looking at a period then where we have governmental overreach and corporate overreach, okay? And so now let's look at the hidden, now I'm not calling it a silver lining, the hidden opportunity for learning or participation on some level that can counter that and does not buy into that. What would that look like?
It's the mastery piece that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Because Capricorn does represent some level of mastery, right? It's theoretically, when you hit the midheaven, you're at the top, the theoretical top of the chart. Really, the top is the bottom in a weird inverse kind of way. But it's high noon in the chart, and that's the point of contact with the world at large.
Yeah.
And when you get to that point in your chart, that's where you get to practice some level of mastery in the world. And that's what Capricorn is about. You do something, long enough, you get really, really good at it.
So in this sense, we can start bringing our ingenuity together, start joining together, and start creating better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really time. And
it's time.
And so, I mean, but when we get into this, right? I mean, it takes a really strong constitution and kind of an unflinching sense of purpose in a lot of ways. And because we've had a year where Jupiter and Sagittarius has revealed personal truth to us, where we come up short, where we lie, where we hide out, where we can shine, where we can expand. And based on the nature of the cyclical progression of astrology, Capricorn says, great, now you get to put these things into practice, right? That's how it works.
Right.
So there's an opportunity for all of us to operate at a higher level, take even more responsibility for our lives, which, we all have areas that we're weak in. I mean, I'm the first to, kind of look at my own failings and things that I need to work on. But this is the time for that, because you don't do it now, right? This is it.
Yeah.
We got Jupiter, we got Saturn, we got Pluto. This is the time. And after this period of time, the ability to step up and make really powerful, catalytic, cardinal changes is going to go away.
So this is important. When the heat's up, now we have to respond. And it sounds like, not to be sappy about it, but genuine deep altruism is the antidote to this kind of sort of clamp down grubbiness that comes about through corporate and governmental overreach.
I think so. I mean, I think that, it gets back into this idea of charity.
Yeah.
And kindness.
Helping each other.
Charity and kindness. And that is something that it's a real practice, and it's not just like taking $10 out and give it to somebody on the street corner. That's easy, and in many instances does nothing, right? But charity and kindness is kind of like being in a moment where if you wanted to, you could crush somebody with your thumb, but you don't. And what you do is you give that person kind of an equitable and graceful kind of out.
Absolutely. I love the point you just made, is extending that kind of grace when the situation might even call for you to do otherwise in a less conscious state. The notion of the virtues is something I've been playing with for a long time. I've also been playing with the notion of feeling this time intensifying, and which I do. I have felt it for quite some time, really starting to get strategic and look around. I brought this up before. It's dog simple. And look and see where your true alliances are, what truly matters to you, where your people are, where you can begin even seeing each other as critical assets, so to speak, in one another's life. If you see that this is something that your road ahead is closing in on you and the options are being narrowed, start looking at other pathways. Where can you go? What can you do? Because the one thing we don't want is for these difficult times to start putting us into a state of fear. That's the worst thing that can happen and should be absolutely avoided at all costs by taking higher action. And if that means we have to change our lifestyle circumstance, and it includes other people, inviting people in, going to other people, I really think it's time to start seriously considering this. I've said it before, but I think we're on the doorstep of it now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's well said.
So let's talk about the eclipse. 26 is the eclipse, and we're going to go a little further into it because I think it's going to, in Southeast Asia, you're saying there could be some really kind of, some potential for some real unrest, Asia and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with China right now, obviously. And some of that I think is planned, and some of it will probably take on a life of its own. Like, I don't think what's happening in Hong Kong started off as something being very spontaneous. I feel like that was another kind of astroturfed revolution, and I've got some, pretty clear pieces of evidence that leads to that.
It seems so, because what they were originally protesting over was withdrawn almost right away, but the protests and the violence intensified.
Right. So what happened is that they continued to protest, and they kept changing sort of the goalposts. And then once there were lines crossed, now we don't. Again, I don't claim to know everything, but there are times when people who are dressed in a particular uniform aren't always playing for that team.
That's true globally. Okay. That is true. That's happened in almost every conflict.
Whether it's a protester or whether it's a policeman.
Exactly.
All right. So there could be clashes and skirmishes that look like one side is actually brutalizing the other side, when in reality they're doing a kabuki theater. Okay. And then what happens is that things begin to escalate. And that's where the protests have gone in China, is this kind of level of police brutality. And I get I get updates from this guy that lives in China, Hong Kong, all the time, and he's sending me stuff that is along these lines. That it's like it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse on the brutality side. Well, that, again, to your point, that's not where it started, and it could have abated, but it hasn't. So I believe that Hong Kong is really the kind of the tinderbox here, and this big domino, and this eclipse that takes place on the 26th. When you look at the eclipse path, it is an annular eclipse, which means that you can see kind of the outer ring of the black sun, okay? And that eclipse path takes place across the South Pacific, including Hong Kong. So from a kind of a geocosmic or geocentric event, I mean, it's happening there. But then when you look at the chart of Hong Kong, and it has that Capricornian midheaven, the eclipse is taking right on top of its Capricornian midheaven. So it's having a sun, solar eclipse right on its midheaven. So I think there could be, I think Hong Kong is ready to explode. And this eclipse, again, we're talking either 2.5 weeks before, 2.5 weeks after, but on the 26th, it is exact. And I'd be very surprised, and who knows, maybe all of a sudden people just stop and they start to hug in the streets and, the world changes. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, that's an outcome I'll hold the space for, but it's not how the pump has been primed.
Okay.
And this is kind of what we're staring down. So I think that eclipse at that time is really, really significant, specifically around Hong Kong and around China. So just keep your eyes on that part of the world. And also, I mean, we're dealing with Uranus and Taurus. That's kind of in the outer reaches of the Ring of Fire. So there could also be some seismic activity around this eclipse as well, because we've seen that with eclipses.
You said in Indonesia
seems to be connected, before and after.
Right.
Sometimes right on the dot.
So I think you were saying that there's a vulnerability, particularly in the area of Indonesia, in terms of seismic activity.
Yeah, absolutely, right around there. Yes, that was my hit. Yeah.
Okay, now one thing that you mentioned in the notes, my little cliff notes here, is that this period of time you were talking about with this eclipse it casts kind of a dark luminescence, and this is also a time that people that practice the dark arts are kind of dialed into, because they feel they can use that extra power. Just as we can take it up to a masterful level and transcend a lot of this, they can also utilize that. And oftentimes when it comes to these manipulative forces, dark arts are a part of the practice and always has been. So what kind of things might you expect us to kind of keep an eye out for?
Well, it's interesting because when I started to look at it and, really kind of size things up, I realized, well, this eclipse is happening in the sign of Capricorn, and very, very early. We're talking, 2-3 degrees Capricorn. And then I began to think about Saturn and how Saturn has this sort of history of being the black sun and the original source of light for our solar system. And I'm like, well, guess what? I mean, this eclipse really is a black sun, and it is radiating through the sign of Capricorn, ruled by the planet of Saturn. So this is a manifestation of the black sun, and there are groups that are dedicated to the cult of the black sun. There was this guy, what was his name? Harry. I always want to call him Harry Duncan, but I don't think that's his name. He was an American. He lived in Paris, and he hung out with F. Scott Fitzgerald and Crowley, and he wrote nothing but poems about the black sun. And they're all, and I remember looking at these poems in college and thinking about, well, is there anything enlightening in here? And I went into it, it's like, man, this stuff is really dark.
Yeah. So this
rather than with sacrifice and and entrails and blood and all these things that we've been we've been sort of searching into. Right?
Yeah. So that's the dark side. That's a potential on the dark side for those who want to play with dark arts. That's not us. That's not the people watching this. We're going to go to our most magnanimous and most masterful part during this time. So now we move into Mars and Scorpio.
I wanted to say one more thing really quickly about that.
Sure.
I was in a chat room. Jay and I just did a show, and I was in Jay's chat room, and this one person brought up that at one point in time with this black sun, that the light on Earth theoretically was purple, which I thought was interesting, especially with the
that's I think that's the work of Xaviant Hayes, whom I've interviewed. Yes.
Okay, so and then there was like more oxygen on the planet, right? And there was right. Yeah. So that's the other side of it too, right? It also speaks to a time. Right.
I did that interview actually in London, so it wasn't Xaviant Hayes. It was another young guy like him. Sorry, can't remember the name, but it's in the Gaia archives actually. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. So that's the other side of it, right? I mean, that's when people theoretically lived to be thousands of years old.
Yes.
Because it was the time of Methuselah.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just the flip side of the sort of the darker side.
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's go to Mars in Scorpio till the beginning of 2020.
Right. So we got Mars in Scorpio, which we're at now. And, it's one of those aspects that can be very good when it comes to hunting down your shadow. If you're really into what's the word, stalking, right? If you're really into that kind of castaneda, shamanic-like version of stalking your shadow, where you're hanging out, it can be really powerful, really, really powerful. Also, Mars in Scorpio is great. I mean, it's a really great energy. It's great for investing in other forms of currency besides hard metals or hard assets. So there could be some opportunities if you are looking to play around with cryptocurrencies or something else. Also, it's a regenerative aspect, and this is a time where you should be really looking at where Mars is showing up in your chart so you can regenerate yourself. And this is going to happen through the end of the year, moving into, I think, 3rd of January, where it moves into Sagittarius. But it's intense energy. It's not lightweight energy. If you use it in the way that it's meant to be used, you can really move some things and push through some things psychically.
I mean, I love this aspect of it. If you're up to it, I mean, it's almost like it's the ultimate kind of internal and external battle between light and dark, and it's even the what's supposed to be the final Star Wars movie is showing up during that period of time. So people are they're going to be doing this through a surrogate experience. But if we took it on a little more literally, it might not be a bad thing, right?
Right. It may not be a bad thing. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't believe it'll be the last Star Wars movie.
I don't either. I'm laughing too. Yeah, right. It gets everybody to the theater. I agree with you.
It's premature celebrating.
Yeah. So here we are. Okay, Mars square. I'm going to read this one. Mars square Neptune in the last week of January. You're saying that it feels a lot like mass deplatforming, shadow banning, and virtual book burns. Victims, martyrs, saints. What the heck? What's this mean?
Yeah, so when we get into, because Mars is Sagittarius again, the pursuit of truth, authenticity, God, crusades, the big picture, right? Self-expression at the highest divine order, things like that. Mars is very active. It's very warrior-like. And Neptune in Pisces, we've seen this throughout Neptune and Pisces reign, which has been the celebration of the victim, people basically being lauded for they're kind of underclass or disabled or disowned status, for better or worse. Okay, you can draw your own commentary around that. But this has happened with Neptune and Pisces. So what we have now coming is we have these two forces that are going to come together and they're going to clash. So quite likely what we're going to see is some kind of event, you know, whether it's another quote unquote shooting or something very public, where all of a sudden there'll be a ton of hand wringing and there'll be a ton of outpouring of, you know, grief or you know, condolences or whatever, but will it be the truth, right? And it could be one of those moments where it may be so forceful. Like, say, for instance, okay, a lot of controversy around Sandy Hook. What if another Sandy Hook-like event happened now, okay? What would happen? Because you'd have a bunch of people, for better or worse, whether they took the Sandy Hook, right, who have been switched on, turned on, and now you've got this event. And if there's any kind of wobble or wiggle in something significant, and you've got this Mars-Neptune square, it will not go down well. It will be a massive debate and rift in people being able to discern what's real and not real. That's number one. That's where the victim and the martyrhood comes in. All right. The other thing that's happening is on December 10th, YouTube is going to drop a lot of channels. Okay, I may not even make it through where YouTube is going because my channel is not monetized. I can't be monetized. I've tried to monetize both of my channels, and I don't meet YouTube's community guidelines. So they're making a quote-unquote business decision to drop channels that are no longer monetized. Owen Benjamin, who became really popular on YouTube, put out a video last night. He says he's got inside information from somebody at YouTube who says after the 10th, he's gone, and they're never going to let him back on again. Now, this is somebody who gets millions of hits, and those are the ones that they report, not the ones that they don't report. So we're going to be dealing with this. And that Mars-Neptune square period, now it may not happen all at once. It may happen with a few whales like they did with Alex Jones, right? It may happen with a few whales. But once they get the whales, they'll eventually go down to the tuna.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we're staring down. And again, this gets into this paradigm with Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, all in Capricorn, YouTube/Google, who owns YouTube, being part of that narrative and shutting things down. So this is where that truth thing, Mars and Sagittarius, clashes against, well, this is for the greater good. We can't have this for the greater good now. And the greater good...
If it's based on monetization... If it's based on monetization concerns, it's not for the greater good. I mean, you know, there's a huge debate around how far should YouTube, Facebook, etc. be allowed to go. When you have snuff films on Facebook, that's gone too far. There's no doubt about it. There has to be a certain point at which we say, when do we become at least somewhat civilized as human beings again? But on the other hand, you don't limit someone's message out of preference or for lack of monetization. That's not right.
Well, I mean, so you have to ask yourself, is there a quote-unquote ethical trade-off? You know, Facebook won't even allow you to post the inserts on a vaccine anymore.
Yeah.
So is the ethical trade-off that you allow snuff film? So the ethical... so that the inserts on vaccines can be posted? Is that the ethical trade-off we're having to stare down?
This is very difficult. Sacha Baron Cohen did an address recently where put a suit and tie on, you know, and he talked about, he addressed some of his work. He said much of it is prurient and sophomoric. We all know that. He said some of it's to make a point, to show these deep divides and these deep prejudices we have. But there comes a point at which a certain amount of kind of ethics and morality has to start re-entering society. And he wasn't, he didn't have a specific agenda that I could tell in terms of the way in which one goes about limiting messages, just that we have to start waking up and taking responsibility ourselves for what we're choosing to support and buy into out there, because there is a lot of, the consciousness when it comes to this media has sunken very, very low.
I think he has a very specific agenda. His agenda is aligned with the ADL, and the ADL will squash anybody who has any dissent about Israel.
Zionism, absolutely.
Zionism.
Yeah, there is that.
Want to talk about bankers or George Soros or the Rothschilds or the Goldschmidts or anybody that's connected even remotely in that way. The ADL wants to eliminate any dialogue around that. And Sacha Baron Cohen has hitched his train to the ADL, so it's very clear what his agenda is.
Well, I was pleased to hear him say, because that was my thought too. That was clear. That's part of it. The other part was...
By the way, this is a guy that makes jokes about Israel doing 9/11. Snicker, snicker, snicker.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Same guy. You got to be careful. I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay, I hear you. I was, I'm a little more innocent in all this stuff, and I was appreciative of some of the comments that he made in terms of propagating anti-Muslim information as well as others. So he at least attempted to be meted and fair-handed in the address. But this is what's going on in people's minds, is how far is too far, and yet not giving up the personal ability to express oneself, because we have free rights of speech, which we're all here because of that. We wouldn't be able to do this in other countries.
Let's be clear. He's not an American, okay?
Yeah.
He's not. He doesn't speak for me.
Yeah.
He doesn't speak for this country. And whether the Constitution is a ragged piece of paper that's been abrogated by the Patriot Act, there's still the First Amendment, and the Second Amendment, and thanks for your input, Sacha Baron Cohen. Go back and deal with Brexit.
Yeah, that's true. I think he's doing that too, stirring stuff up on that one. But when it comes down to what you're talking about, again, if you're saying monetization is the key element in terms of determining who stays on and who doesn't, what can we do about that? That's wrong. Just because someone doesn't have the ability or desire to monetize does not mean their voice should not be heard.
Well, it's an arbitrary standard.
It's very arbitrary.
Standard. That's all. That's all. They're just using it as a standard, and it's arbitrary. So if they don't like your content and it doesn't meet their community standards, which means you can't be monetized, you're out of there. They found the thing. They found the thing. That's what they did. They found their little glitch, right?
Right.
And so
they're going to get a lot of blowback on that one.
What's that?
They're going to get a lot of blowback on that one when people's favorite sites start disappearing.
Yeah, this and hopefully, what happens is a lot of times they'll do something and it'll be a big overcorrect.
Yeah.
And then they'll let people back in, but the ones that they want to keep out, they'll keep them out, right? So they'll get what they want, right? It's like people when they put something together in a bill for Congress, or they'll throw it all in there. They don't expect to get everything.
Right.
But they get like the 5 key things out of the 10 things that they want, then that's a win for them. And I think that's how YouTube and Google will see this.
Well, let's see how it goes down, because we're all vulnerable to this one. Now, yeah. And so now let's pick it up with Saturn-Pluto conjunction, lunar eclipse on 1/11, which is my stepson's birthday. And he's a powerful little player with a lot of powerful changes coming up. But let's talk about what it means to us at large, because I've heard a number of astrologers talk about this.
So for me, I've been doing some interesting research on Tartaria. And I know that you probably have played around with Tartaria and talked to some Tartarian people. John Levy has a really, really good YouTube channel around Tartaria. And Jay and I just did a show last week. And some of the things that I've been exploring have brought me to this concept of the reset. And a lot of people think of reset in terms of economy, the global financial reset. I tend to think of it as that and more, that there is a chronological reset, cultural reset, economic reset, And the idea around Tartaria was that there was a civilization that was global, and around 1848, 1849, 1850, something happens. Like something major happens. And it's almost like there's this different chronology that takes place. So I looked at the astrology around that, which I've done a whole bunch of shows on already. I don't want to get into here. But what I was able to infer from that period of time and from what was going on then and what we're seeing now is that we are in the midst of the next reset. Like it is happening. And when the final piece of the reset happens, it will happen very quickly and people won't know what hit them. It'll be like there will be a before and an after. It won't be like this steady decline of a year or 2 years or 3 years. And I don't know specifically when that time is coming, but this eclipse on the 11th with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is going to give us some insight into that, insight into this reset.
So now are you referring to things as literal as the replacement of Federal Reserve notes with potentially with U.S. Treasury notes, all the way to maybe deeper involvement in cryptocurrencies, dissolution of currencies in general, and then what are you speaking about on an economic model level, and then what are you talking about beyond economics?
Well, so on an economic level, it's pretty clear that the fiat currency has run its course and that there's just bleeding going on and everything is just pumped up and based on steroidal debt that is unpayable into the future. I mean, it doesn't matter who it is. These politicians who sit there and say that we can pay for all this is just, they're completely nuts. Unless, of course, they're going to leverage everything and everybody moving forward in order to pay for it. You know, human capital, that's a whole other discussion. So we have to come to some conclusion that the fiat game is going to end, and it will end. Whether it ends gracefully, whether it ends abruptly, it will end. And it will end within the next 7-year cycle with Uranus and Taurus, which, by the way, was one of the outer planets that took place, that was in the astrological sky in 1850 when this kind of Tartarian reset theoretically took place. Okay, so that's one factor we have to look at. Now, will we see that on this eclipse? We might be able to see it on this eclipse. We might see a massive tremor in the financial markets. I would not be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised either. I mean, the hints are already there, but go ahead.
And we're already dealing, like, so one of the things that I think maybe you and I talked about last time, and these continue to be more very popular, are these apps like Rakuten and Posh, and where you get money back, money back, money back.
Right.
And these are going to become more popular because the dollar is going to be able to purchase less.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to incentivize people to go through these apps so you can actually get more, get you more away from spending. Well, at some point, it's going to become a necessity, right? That may be the only form of transaction possible. That could be a little bit down the line. But anyway, so that's going to take place. And that's already in motion. But there's something even beyond that I think is kind of what I'm speaking to about this reset. And that is the eradication of history in the last 200 years. And that is very dramatic in its scope and in its premise.
What do you mean the eradication of history?
Well, for instance, I'll give you like a really basic thumbnail. The last 3 years, let's say, they were going through the South, taking down statuary of the Civil War, right? Robert E. Lee, blah, 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 blah. And whether you agree with it or not, it's the eradication of history. These are historical monuments that are removed. The Soviets were great at this, right? They just eradicated what, even Stalin, who was a god, once Stalin was gone, they eradicated him, right? That's why we're moving on. It's the new Politburo. But this is already happening. We're seeing it now on college campuses where new schools of thought are being taught. There's this whole idea that everything that's connected with how we got here now is toxic, is tainted, and needs to be eradicated. That we're living off the fumes of this so-called colonialism, and no progress, no change can ever occur unless it's burned to the ground. This is what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the reset has this at its heart. Because if you go back and look, and this Tartarian stuff is it's controversial. Not everybody buys into it. It's, it's kind of a kissing cousin of flat earth in some ways.
Yeah.
I'm not a flat earther, but the
Yeah.
Tartarian stuff really grabbed me and
Mm-hmm.
began to speak back to me so much. And I just want to share this, that when Jay and I were talking about this a week ago, I was talking about the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And the Pied Piper Hamelin is a theme that for me really spoke to this Tartarian piece, because it gets into orphan trains and orphans and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And so I started to talk about the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Well, just yesterday, John Levy uploads a new video. It's like, where did all the kids come from? And he dives into this thing that happened during World War II. It was called Operation Pied Piper. And they were taking these kids, saying, well, you're in a really dangerous place. We got to take you out of here, right? And then, well, what are they doing with those kids? Well, those kids never went back home. And he gets into the original Pied Piper of Hamelin story as well. So when I get into stuff like this, and all of a sudden now I've got this dialogue with, and I know that other people have the same thing, and you do too, Regina, right? And all of a sudden this thing starts like talking back to you. I'm listening. I'm all ears. So it feels to me like we are in this reset process, and it's not just economic. It's not even political, although it actually has some of those things as part of it. It's something along the lines of, we wake up and let's say it's 2025 or 2026 or 2027, and there's very little memory of what's happened over the last 200 years.
Well, oddly, funny you should say that, just on a metaphysical level. Remember many years ago, the beings that educated me for many years explained what would be happening during this period of time coming up. And this is starting to become interesting because it dovetails with what you're saying, and I'm seeing evidence of it. I was asking questions about the dissipation of the magnetic field. And they said, well, the most contentious part of that, or challenging part of that, will be that the human brain operates. That's its protective field. The magnetic field is how our brains operate. And once that's dissipated, there's less connection to what we see as kind of structured reality in our own perception. And one of the things that would be happening is not only craziness in the world, mental instability, but also a type of dreaminess, in that it would become hard to distinguish what's real and what's not. What was a dream, for example, versus what happened in our waking hours. Now, I'm seeing something really odd with this. I've always been an active dreamer, but I'll close my eyes and I'm not even seconds away from closing my eyes. I'm not asleep yet. I'm seeing other people's realities. I'm watching people at another dinner table somewhere, people I don't know. I'm dropping into all kinds of different realities. And so I spoke with a close friend of mine, another former news anchor, and she said, I don't think I've ever told you about this, but it's almost as though I have this other life running parallel somewhere else. And there are days I don't know if what I'm seeing and saying comes from my world here or that other place that I keep crossing over into. So the erasure of history on a human level, I think, is almost inevitable with the geophysics of what's going on.
Well, I think that you're probably, that sounds very correct to me. And I also feel that a lot of this is also being socially engineered. Because
I think you got that interference too. I would agree with that.
Because the people that managed, theoretically, the last reset, well, they're managing the new reset now, and through different modalities, very, very different modalities, and some of which I've talked about, and it can be seen as quite controversial in some ways. But to your point about living these alternate lives, I've had that experience too.
Yeah, well, no one used to talk about this. I've done a few shows on it recently, both at Gaia and on my site, because it's becoming so prominent in our experience. So I think just to be aware of it. And also, I remember years ago, these beings telling me, one of the things you can do is you can find, if you find one that works for you, find various little magnetic devices that you can wear as necklaces, earrings, and on your body. Test them, see that they're compatible with your field, but that if you can keep a magnetic field supported even very close around your head and your body, it will help some during this period of time, because it's a known period of time. It's known that this was going to happen with the earth and all of its inhabitants, all of its animals, it's all of the kingdoms here. So I think help ourselves how we can, but also be aware. It's also, like you say, perhaps on an organic level, a reset to living kind of a multidimensional, consciously multidimensional life.
Yeah. Well, Capricorn is the ruler of time. We see images of Kronos and the Grim Reaper, and all associated with the sign of Capricorn. So time and Kronos are going to be a big part of the story in 2020, and especially in the early part of the year, because we're in those very early decans of Capricorn, both with Jupiter and the Sun, and we have the 2 eclipses that are going to be taking place, and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So it's going to be a very, very interesting time. And again, people should only be afraid in as much as they let fear determine their reality. And
Right.
if you can step forward in real fullness, and face where we're going without fear, you can navigate these changes in ways that other people may not be able to. It reminds me of the movie Fearless with Jeff Bridges,
Mm-hmm.
which is a kind of a brilliant movie. And if you've never seen it, Jeff Bridges is on an airplane, and while the plane is going down, he becomes conscious and aware, and in a very different state than everybody else, and is actually able to help people, survives the crash, and then he's able to interact with people and their lives in an almost godlike fashion in some ways.
I love that as we draw to a close here. I love that as an analogy, and that speaks to me as being truthful. Each one of us has that within ourselves if we can rise up into it. And I see this as really an amazing opportunity to rise to the highest and best within ourselves during all of this. And we don't have to lose our sanity. It's just becoming more spiritually mature and aware of the nature of reality, which is much more vast than that narrow little chute that we've been shoved down for the last several thousand years. So yeah, it's maybe just going back into our truer nature anyway, and just learning how to navigate it, as you say. So any final thoughts, Robert, before we tie up?
Yeah, one other thought, and I think that this is maybe the most important one, is that there's can be a lot of charge around this idea of God. Like I used God on a post yesterday, and somebody said, well, I really like that term logos better, okay, because it's not so charged. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. But whatever you want to term the thing that connects all of us and makes us better people, you gotta get right with this source. Like, that's really important, to get really right with this source. Like, that should be first and foremost in your life right now. So get right with that, get clear with that, so you can latch on to that light, and that can be your guiding your LED lamp through these times. I think that's step number one.
Couldn't agree more, Robert. So on that note, okay, here we go, off into 2020. And I really appreciate your bringing all this forward, because I think it's wise to be forewarned. I don't think it's, we could have avoided doing this one and say, oh, we'll pick it up in the spring or summer if things are more pleasant by then. But that's not the right thing to do. We have to tune into all the cycles and do the best we can within them. So I thank you again, and we'll be seeing you in the spring of 2020.
We'll be back. We'll be back.
We'll all get through all of this together. Okay, Robert, have a wonderful holiday season in the remaining days of 2019.
Thanks, Regina.
Again, everybody, you can go to robertphoenix.com and check out Robert's work further. Also get involved in some of his other media and even work on private sessions with him. So until next time, thank you for joining us here on reginameredith.com.